Have you ever stopped to think how the war to end all wars was followed just 20 years later by a conflict that was even bigger and deadlier? You know, the story isn't as simple as just one bad guy's rise to power. It actually starts with the very treaty that was supposed to guarantee peace forever. Let's get into it. And that's really the core of what we're talking about today. How did the Treaty of Versailles, this huge peace agreement, somehow become a roadmap to another world war? It's a fascinating and honestly tragic story of good intentions, deep-seated humiliation, and ultimately revenge. To really get the treaty, you have to understand just how desperate everyone was. The world was crawling out of the wreckage of a war so brutal, so horrific, it was almost beyond imagination. All they wanted was a peace that would stick. 40 million. Just let that number sink in for a sec. 40 million casualties in the First World War. Almost half of those people died. When you're dealing with that level of loss, you can see why the winners were so determined to make sure it never ever happened again. The problem was, their solution was anything but perfect. You see, the Treaty of Versailles wasn't really a negotiation. It was more like a list of demands. Germany wasn't even invited to the table. They were forced to sign a document that put all the blame for the war squarely on their shoulders. That's the famous war guilt clause. Then they were hit with massive payments, called reparations, that were designed to just cripple their economy. And on top of all that, they lost huge chunks of territory and had to completely dismantle their military. For a country with a lot of national pride, this wasn't just a penalty, it was a total public humiliation. So a peace treaty that leaves one side feeling completely and utterly crushed? Well, that's not really peace, is it? It's more like hitting the pause button on a conflict. And instead of creating harmony, the Treaty of Versailles basically dug this deep well of resentment that would poison politics in Europe for decades. And here's the thing, Germany wasn't the only one feeling angry. Italy, even though they were on the winning side, felt like they got shortchanged on territory they'd been promised. Japan was also really unhappy, feeling like its own ambitions in Asia were totally ignored. You can kind of see a pattern forming here, right? These three nations, Germany, Italy, and Japan, would eventually become the Axis powers, all brought together by this shared feeling that they had gotten a raw deal. Well, when a whole country feels humiliated and is struggling economically, people start looking for radical answers. They look for strong leaders who promise to bring back national pride. This environment was the perfect breeding ground for extreme ideas like fascism. It created a huge opening for charismatic and very dangerous men like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini to rally people who were angry and desperate. All this simmering anger just needed a spark. It took one more massive crisis to really push Germany over the edge and right into the arms of a dictator. And that crisis, it was all about money, and it started all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Germany's economy was already on its knees from paying those reparations, so when the Great Depression hit, it was a total knockout blow. Unemployment went through the roof, the government seemed helpless, and people got really desperate. Hitler saw this vacuum and he jumped right in, promising jobs, a strong nation, and a return to German greatness. And his rise was shockingly fast. After a failed attempt to take over by force in 1923, he realized he had to play the political game. While he was in prison, he wrote his book, Mein Kampf. Then, when the Great Depression hit, his extreme message started to sound pretty good to a lot of people. By 1933, he was made chancellor. Just 1 year later, the president died, and Hitler basically tore up the Constitution and declared himself Führer, the absolute leader. So, once he had total power, Hitler didn't waste any time. What was his first target? The very treaty he blamed for all of Germany's problems, the Treaty of Versailles. He started to tear it apart, piece by piece. And a world that was terrified of another war pretty much let him do it. I mean, look at how this escalated. First, he starts rebuilding the army, which was a clear violation of the treaty. The world did nothing. Then he marches troops into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone right next to France. Again, no real response. So feeling more and more confident, he then announces he's going to take over parts of neighboring Czechoslovakia. Each move was a test, and every single time, the other world powers failed that test. This whole strategy of giving in to Hitler had a name: appeasement. The thinking, especially from leaders like the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, was that if they just gave Hitler what he said he wanted, in this case part of Czechoslovakia, he'd be happy, and they could avoid another horrible war. Chamberlain literally came back from a meeting with Hitler waving a piece of paper, telling everyone he had secured peace for our time. But not everyone was buying it. Winston Churchill, who was a bit of a political outsider at the time, saw appeasement for exactly what it was: a terrible mistake. He gave this absolutely chilling warning, basically saying that by choosing to avoid a fight now, they had guaranteed that a much worse fight was coming. And of course, Churchill was proven right in the worst way possible. Just a few months after promising he was done making demands, Hitler's tanks rolled into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Just like that, the illusion of peace was gone. Appeasement was a total, undeniable failure. The world finally had to admit that Hitler couldn't be trusted. So with Czechoslovakia gone, Hitler's gaze turned east, towards Poland. But before he could invade, he had one big strategic problem to solve. He had to avoid a war on two fronts at all costs. And then came the move that nobody saw coming: Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union. Two regimes that absolutely hated each other signed a non-aggression pact. It was a deal made out of pure self-interest. It gave Hitler the green light to invade Poland without having to worry about a Soviet attack from the east. And in a secret part of the deal, Stalin was promised his own piece of Poland. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler unleashed a terrifying new kind of warfare on Poland: the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. This was the complete opposite of the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I. This was all about speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. You had dive bombers, tanks, and infantry all working together in perfect coordination to just punch through the enemy lines and cause total chaos. And what happened next was, well, it was surreal. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but then for months, almost nothing happened on the Western Front. It was so quiet, they called it the phony war. But in Poland, it was an absolute nightmare. The Germans were committing mass executions. Their air force was bombing cities into dust, and the entire country was being carved up between Germany and the Soviet Union. Two totally different wars were happening at the same time. So the invasion of Poland finally triggered a response. On September 3rd, Britain and France officially declared war. And while things were quiet on land in the West, the war at sea, the Battle of the Atlantic, started right away. And politically, the failure of appeasement meant that Winston Churchill was brought back into the government. Meanwhile, the League of Nations, the group that was supposed to prevent all this, proved to be completely useless. The stage was now set. The road from that peace treaty at Versailles to the battlefields of Poland was long and twisted, paved with anger, economic disaster, and some really bad decisions. As 1939 came to a close, there was this strange calm over Western Europe. But everyone knew it wouldn't last. The question on everybody's mind was simple and terrifying. What was coming next?